All right, well, today we are in the sixth and final part of a series called Make Believe. Pretty good. Make believe. The question we're asking is, how do you make yourself believe something? Before I bring you up to speed, if you haven't been here the past couple weeks, I want to tell you two stories. Actually, both stories I heard this week for the first time. So there's this woman who was going for a job interview. There's this position she really wanted. It was like a real career change for her. The opportunity to make some progress in her career. She's really excited about it. She had an interview. It seemed to go really well. And then, because it went well, they decided to ask her to come out to this banquet with some of the higher-ups in her organization. To see, okay, we see you got what it takes on paper, but let's see how, the chemistry is with the team. And so she goes to this banquet, and it's a fundraising banquet to raise money for families of children with epilepsy. And so she goes there, and she's sitting at the table, and she's looking around, and everybody's talking to each other, but nobody's really talking to her. And she feels like, this is my chance. I'm blowing it. When are they going to ask me some questions? I need to make an impression. I'm not going to get this job. She starts thinking about it, right? And there's an auction at this banquet. Now, she had been to an auction in the past with a lot of really wealthy, famous people. And so at this auction she was at in the past, she was with her friends. They're at this table, and an item comes up, is put up for bid, and she raises her paddle right in the beginning with no intention of buying it. And all her friends know she's never going to buy it, but she was banking on the fact she was going to get outbid. And so she did, and someone else paid way more money for it or whatever. But it was kind of a laugh. They had a good moment. They had a story to tell, and she was the life of the party, and it was great. So she's sitting at this table with these executives, and she's like, I've been here before. I know what to do, right? I'll make a good impression on them. So the first item comes up for bid, and the guy who's doing it at the front says, we're going to start out at $25,000. And right away, she puts up her paddle, right? And everybody at the table looks at her like, what in the world are you doing? And she's got the I got this type thing. Well, she didn't actually, because it wasn't an auction. She was making a pledge of $25,000. And she wasn't pledging on behalf of herself. She was pledging on behalf of the company that she was interviewing for. And so she goes into this panic. She's like, this is horrible. She gets up. She runs to the back of the room looking for somebody who's in charge. This is a big mistake. You got to take this down. And so the person said, don't worry about it. We'll take it down. We'll fix the problem. So she goes to sit down, and she's with these executives. And there's this leaderboard right in front of the whole crowd, all the people. And their name is on top. And very obviously in front of everyone, she said, feeling like everyone in the room was watching, they removed the company's name from the board. And so she didn't get the job. And she's in this interview, and they're like, so what happened? What did this do to you? And she said, honestly, it was really damaging. I used to be a really confident person. I used to write blogs. I used to give marriage advice. I was really comfortable in my own skin. But she's like, after this, things changed. All of a sudden, I was really hesitant to speak up. I felt like I had learned something, to not make a fool of myself like that. And it totally broke her confidence. Second story. Also heard the story this week. There's a grown woman, who had a friend who lived in an apartment building in New York City, and she was spending the night in that apartment building for the first time. She had never been there before. And it comes time to go to bed. She gets in bed, and right as she's about to fall asleep, the last thought she has is, I have to go to the bathroom. But she didn't want to get out of bed, so she stayed in bed and went to sleep. Well, she has this dream, and in the dream, she's pushing a door because she has to go to the bathroom. And all of a sudden, she wakes up, and she finds herself actually pushing a door. But she's in the stairwell of the apartment building, and she realizes she's not wearing any clothes. And so she's trapped in this stairwell in this apartment building, And she's only been in it one time, and she's looking, through the window and the door and the stairwell, trying to figure out which room she needs to go back into. And she goes and knocks on the door of one of the rooms, thinking it's the room she's supposed to be, and she finds out it's not. And it's the middle of the night, and then she realizes she doesn't even remember what floor she's supposed to be on. When she was a child, she had a few sleepwalking episodes, but this had never happened since she was an adult. And so here she's in this horrible situation. She feels totally helpless. At one point, she just stops and cries because she doesn't know what to do. To make a long story short, eventually on one floor, she hears of some noise. She hears some people talking, and so she knocks on the door. She runs back to the stairwell, and as the person comes out, it's a woman. And she says, look, I'm in this really tough situation. Can you help me out? And the woman says, no problem. I'm going to get you a tracksuit. Come on in. And then the woman goes inside, and the door's about to slam. And now I guess this woman didn't realize, it didn't click with her that the woman wouldn't want to get out of the stairwell. But out of fear that she was going to get locked out, she runs into the room to follow the woman to get the clothes. And as soon as she walks in, she sees there's a room full of people. They're having a party there. And it was just mortifying for her. And so in this was in a podcast, she's being interviewed, and they said, so what did this do to you? And she said, after that experience, embarrassment, it's just not really that big of a deal anymore. She's like, anytime I'm embarrassed, I feel like, well, at least I'm not in that stairwell, right? And it totally, every other event seemed like not that bad. And so I'm listening to this, and right away, the question that I'm asking is, how is it that such similar events have such dramatically different outcomes? How is it that for one person, it had the ability to make their confidence, and for someone else, it ended up breaking their confidence? So hold that thought for a minute. So we're in a series called Make Believe. And the question that we're asking, like I said before, is how do you make yourself believe? What I've asked you to do is just imagine. Just imagine, whether you're a person of faith or not, just imagine what your life could look like if you believed that, there really was a God up there who cared about you, who loved you unconditionally, really was for you, really had your best in mind, and you trusted him completely. How would that change the way you hear bad news? How would that change the way you face challenges? How would that change the way you deal with struggle? What would you try to attempt? How differently would you live? Whether you're a person of faith or not, just the idea of that is, for me, is pretty inspiring. So the question we've been asking is, well, how do you get there, right? How do you have great faith? Faith. Now, when we say faith, our kind of working definition for this series is confidence. When we say we have faith in God, really what we're saying is we have confidence in God, that he is who he says he is, and that he'll do what he says he'll do. And if you know anything about confidence or about trust, it's not just something that you can manufacture, right? You can't just muster it up. Someone tells you to trust someone, you need a reason to trust them. Trust needs to be built. And so we've said okay, well then how? How do you get there? And that brings us to what we've been talking about, the 5 faith catalysts. We believe there are 5 things that are in every person of faith's faith story, right? And the first thing we said was providential relationships. If you ask people of faith, hey, how did your faith grow? In almost everyone's story, there is a person. And this might be a friend, it could be a coworker, it could be a mentor, it could be a teacher, it could be someone in the faith. But there's someone, if you look back at the timeline of your life, it's if they weren't there, my faith looks very different. So providential relationships. The second one we said practical teaching. Practical teaching. In someone's faith story, what you'll hear them say is oh, I went to some camp, or I went to some church, or I met some person, or I listened to something, or I watched some show. And for the first time, someone opened up the teachings of Jesus, explained them to me in a way, not that I could memorize or recite, but in a way I could put into practice. And when I did, I saw that there was something to it. My faith actually grew. Practical teaching. Then we talked about personal ministry. So the idea behind ministry is really this idea of serving. And when someone steps up and says, okay, I'll play that part, I'll help out, I'll lend a hand, right? And maybe, or often we could say, it brings with it this feeling of inadequacy. Like it feels like, well, this is all I have to bring to the table here. But when we do that, when we step out to serve someone, often in a position where we feel inadequate, there's this feeling like, well, we've got to trust that God is going to come through. And you'd be surprised to see how much it stretches you, how much it strengthens your faith, personal ministry. Then last week, we talked about private disciplines. You ask someone about their faith story, and they'll tell you, like, at some point, things became between me and God. Like I started praying on my own. Not like the, God help me find a parking spot, like prayer that you shoot up real quick. But I took a few minutes in the beginning of the day and set aside time to just like talk to God about my day. And my faith became my faith, not someone else's, but mine. And it's because of habits that I built that were between me and God. And so today we are on our last faith catalyst. And we didn't make this up, but we call it pivotal circumstances. Pivotal circumstances. These are events or seasons that lead to some kind of a change in life. They could be good, they could be bad, they could be expected, they could be unexpected, but it's almost like a fork in the road. When that happened, my life changed. So for a lot of people, getting married is a pivotal circumstance, right? Becoming a parent, that's a pivotal circumstance. A lot of times it's the beginning and ends of things, right? So maybe the end of a relationship is a pivotal circumstance where things change from that point on. Maybe you get a new job. That's a pivotal circumstance. Maybe you lose a job. That's a pivotal circumstance. Any time in life where there's this feeling like things are going to change. And often what we see is that's when people go looking for faith. Right? When what we're used to, the control of what we used to kind of slips out of our hands, it's like, well, now what do I do? And often these are catalysts for us to really begin trusting God. They cause us to turn to someone maybe we wouldn't typically turn to. Pivotal circumstances. Now, pivotal circumstances. Two stories. When I was 18 years old, I had the chance for the first time to go to another country. I went to the Philippines, I went with the basketball team, and we played in each one of the little villages, and then we got to talk to the people from the village, and it was a lot of fun. While I was there, I was exposed to a level of poverty like I didn't even know existed. There were these crowds of people that would come out of the villages to watch us play against their village team. And after the games, we would talk to them, and I remember there was one time specifically where we're right in the middle of our presentation to the crowd. A garbage truck drove through. And with that, half of the crowd left and followed the garbage truck. They lived right near a dump. And as soon as the garbage truck emptied, it was new stuff that they could pick from. And it was so eye-opening. It was moving to me. It radically shaped my faith. When I saw the way that we worked in an orphanage, when I saw the way that these kids lived, the joy that some of these people lived, in spite of theirs, it radically, you could say, it really solidified so much of what I believe. It was huge for me. Maybe you've heard of Steve Jobs. Anybody heard of Steve Jobs? Apple, right? Started Apple, iPhone. We love Steve Jobs. When he was a kid, he got a hold of Time magazine. And on the cover of Time magazine, there was a child who lived in a third world country, who was living in poverty. And he saw the picture, opened it up, read the article, saw more of that. And so as a child, he brought that magazine to his Sunday school class. He brought it to church. And he went up to his Sunday school teacher and he said, "Does God know about this?" And the teacher said, "Well, yes, God knows about that." And he said, "Well, I'll never believe in a God like that." And he walked away. Wrapped it up, never looked back. How is it that such similar circumstances can have such dramatically different outcomes? How is it that for some people it can make pivotal circumstances can make their faith, and for other people it breaks their faith? When we talk about pivotal circumstances, maybe for you, maybe you know people who were diagnosed with something, and it caused them to turn to God like they never had before. Maybe you know people who were diagnosed with something and it caused them to hang up their faith forever. Maybe you know someone who lost someone and it made their faith. They turned to God. Or you know someone that lost someone and they gave up their faith. Pivotal circumstances have the ability to make or break our faith. You will have, might be going through right now, but definitely will face pivotal circumstances. And the question is, what can we do to make sure that pivotal circumstances make and don't break our faith? Jesus had a brother. His name was James. Whenever we talk about James, you just kind of feel bad for him because Jesus' brother, like always living. Why can't you be more like Jesus, James, right? So my heart goes out to James. James had something to say about this, like pretty profound, that shed some light on how we handle not pivotal circumstances in general, but specifically the difficult side of pivotal circumstances. And here's what he says. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters. Consider it pure joy, or all joy. When? He says, whenever you face trials of many kinds, consider it pure joy." Now, at first glance, this is like, it seems like an empty Christian platitude. Like, really, we're supposed to just consider our painful struggles, our trials of like many kinds, all sorts of trials. We're supposed to just find joy in that, right? Like one time, a couple of years ago, I got an email from someone. Really nice lady. But she said, I'm sure with this verse in mind, she said, in the email, she said, "I thank God for whatever difficulty you are facing right now." I was like, well, I just pray high taxes and ingrown toenails over, right? Like, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to that, right? And that's kind of like what it seems like. Like, really, you're not going to see this in a sympathy card. Like, well, consider what you're going through joy. It seems like an empty platitude at first glance. But what James is saying, he's not saying, like, put on a plastic smile when things go bad. Like, pretend it's okay when it's not. He's saying, take a positive view of negative circumstances, right? And then he unpacks this a little bit. He says, whenever you face, no, we can go back. He says, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Whenever you face, I've said this before, you either like are coming out of a difficult circumstance, are in a difficult circumstance, or probably are going into it. That's just like life. We go through difficulties. You will. I read a book not too long ago. Actually, I didn't read the book. I read about the book, heard about it, watched a few YouTube videos, and decided I didn't need to read it. I got the idea. But it's a book called Born to Run. And it's about this guy who meets this group of people that just run all the time, like dozens and dozens of miles every single day. And from this book came like the barefoot movement, and that was cool, like enough to start a little phase in my life where I didn't wear shoes, but I'm over that now. So this American goes to this tribe where they run all the time, all day, like an unreal amount of miles every single day. And he's running with one of the guys from the tribe because that's what they do. And at some point, one of the natives looks at him, and as they're running, he says, "Do you know what the problem is with you Americans?" And the guy says, "What?" And he said, "You're always thinking about the end of the run. Like, how much longer? How far is it going to be? You're always trying to get out of it." He's like, us, we just run. Like, and we're in it. And we think about what it's like to run. I wonder if James would say to us, right? Like, when it comes to trials, difficult circumstances, seasons, we are always thinking about how to get out of them. Like, how much longer do I have to push through this? When is this gonna end? We're always thinking, like, how much longer? When's it gonna end? Is this gonna get, like, we're always focused on getting it, which is understandable. Like, when things are hard in my life, I want it to end, okay? Like, that's human nature. However, like, what if we gave a little bit more time to how we were living in the difficulty? Like, while it's going on. Maybe you've been wronged. Maybe something's been taken from you. Maybe you like something has happened to you. You had no control over it, and now your situation stinks, and it might stink for a while. At some point, this is going to end, and you're going to look back, right? And what kind of story do you want to tell about the way you responded when you were treated the way you were treated? When this was taken from you? When you were forced to do that? When things didn't go the way that how were we in it? In it. We give a lot of time to getting out. We don't give much time to what's happening on the inside. He said, when you face trials of many kinds, and I mentioned before, many kinds, it basically is just this umbrella term, all sorts of difficulties. And here's how you take a positive view of these negative circumstances. He says, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Now, when you hear testing, at least when I hear testing, it's like, really, like, is God just up there testing us? Like, he's got nothing better than to just, like, poke at us down here, you know? Or, like, you ever see Toy Story? If you haven't, that's another one. Toy Story. There's this neighbor, Sid. He takes the toys, just, like, pops the heads off, you know, and puts them, and he comes up with these weird concoctions and, like, shoots them off in rockets. Like, just you know, pushing them to the limit, right? Like, that's why I would read this, and at first glance, like, okay, is God just, like, testing our faith? See, how's he going to do? How's she going to do? But that's not the idea here. The idea is, like, it is your in trials, your faith is put to the test, right? Like a Jeep Wrangler is put to the test, or like the new Ford Bronco, is put to the test, not on a smooth road, but when it's going up a hill or going through the mud or that's when you see what its ability can hold. And what he's saying here is, this is when you'll see what your faith can hold. Not when things are going well, but when you see, like, okay, things don't look great right now. Can I still trust that God is for me? That he cares? Like the paper towel commercials, you know, when they hold something or they put, because all the blue liquid is blue in paper towel commercials, you know, and it's like, can it hold the object or is it going to fall through? Like, that's what he means by it's put to the test. It's not a pass or fail thing. In fact, later on in this letter, James says, like, when something's happening to you, you shouldn't think that God's testing you. That's not what's going on there. It's put to the test. You see what it can hold. It's like a muscle, right? And this is a little bit of an overused metaphor, but a muscle is put to the test when you have to lift, right? If you don't do anything with it, it's just going to, like, you know, fade away or whatever, however muscles get weaker, right? But when you work and you strength is built when strength is needed, right? And it's the same way with trust. Trust is built when trust is needed. Whether it's with God or a person. If it's a person and you're like, I don't know, can I trust him? Can I trust her? Well, there you go. You got to, like, put it out there and see. And that trust will either be broken or it will be built. But it's built, like when we're talking about God, it is built time and time again when we have to exercise it, and we have to exercise it in our struggles. Trust is built when trust is needed. For me, all right, like to let you into like my life a little bit, this is a regular basis. I have to regularly decide if I really believe what I say I believe, you know? And so I'll be up here and 1 week we're talking about, like, you know, getting in an argument with your spouse. It's like, you'll have an opportunity where, you know, maybe things are, and you know, you got the comment, you can drop it and you'll win, and it might be a little hurtful, but you know you'll win, and you know, right? And I'll talk about that and be like, but you should bite your tongue, because in the end, it's going to work better for your spouse and for your relationship, and God knows what's, and I'll say that, right? And then, like, I'll get home, and it, like, happens, you know, and then I'm like, oh boy, I really got to decide here. Do I believe this or and it's my faith, my confidence in who God is and what he says is put to the test. Do I actually believe this? And every single time I make the right choice. I'm just kidding. My wife, Allie, she works in the kids department. You can talk to her about this after the service. It's put to the test, right? It's put to the test. James says that this will produce endurance or perseverance. The word here it has this idea of immovable, steadfast. Like outside in the parking lot, there's this gigantic tree, right? We call it the tree of life. It's right smack in the middle. It's got that weird metal bracket on it. Once that was a basketball hoop. Anyway, you go up to that, give it a push, right? Give it a kick, try and knock it over. You won't be able to. Why? Because it has endurance. That's the picture. Like it's not moving. And when we talk about faith, if you've been here in the beginning of these messages, I've said, imagine having great faith, like that's the picture. The picture of like your circumstances might be like this, but you know, like, no, you know what, this might be hard, but there's someone who cares about me, who is in my corner. When I was in high school, I was in a really rough relationship for 2 years, high school actually, and then a little bit into college. And the difficulty with it was that there was no trust. And it was like torture. ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. Because like, I don't know if I can trust him. I don't know if she can trust him. And we're going back and forth. And it's like, it is exhausting. It's exhausting. And James actually like makes a connection with this. He refers to it as like when our faith in God is like that, it's like being in the waves. And that's what it felt like. You're being just like thrown back and forth. And for some of us, like we're more like the waves and less like the tree, right? Which is normal. We're all working toward the tree, but sometimes life feels like, well, can I trust him? I don't know. And so boom, and back, and that's exhausting. That's exhausting. But these trials, they can produce that kind of endurance, that kind of steadfastness. Now, there's one word I want to direct your attention to. Produce endurance. You see this word? Produces. I've said endurance. The word's perseverance. Produces. When we think about trials, struggling, suffering, almost always, it has to do with loss. Right? Like, I wanted this to happen and now that's been taken from me. Or this person was in my life and that's been taken. Or things could have gone, but it's this feeling like things could have been and it's a feeling of loss when we struggle. What James is inviting us to do here is to see like what these trials, not what we can lose from them, but what we can gain. He's saying they produce something. Like you can get something out of this. Or in other words, to say like when we face trials, rather than saying, how can I get out of it? Like what if, and that's a reasonable question, right? Because we don't want to just live there. But instead of only asking, how can I get out of it? What if we asked, what can I get out of it? Like, is there something here in this difficulty? Maybe you brought it on yourself, maybe you didn't. But is there something here that I need to learn? Is there something here that maybe God is using to show me, like I need to trust him with? Rather than just thinking, this has got to end, I don't like this is uncomfortable, I want to get out, I want it to be over, I want to move on. What if we're missing what these trials could produce in us? What we can gain from it because we're thinking about when it's going to end. There's a pastor I like to listen to, he says, like, pain without gain is a shame. Like you are going to go through pain. It's going to happen. And sometimes we learn the easy way. Sometimes we learn the hard way. And sometimes we don't learn, if we're honest, because we're so focused on it ending. What if we asked, not just how can I get out of this, but what can I get out of it? There's one word really that all of this hangs on. And I've kind of hinted at it before. We talked about it first. The one thing that this whole thing that we need to do, it's this word consider. Consider. In the original language, consider is not just to think about. It has the idea of how you see something. What he's saying is that, like, the answer, the question that we started with, like, what determines whether this makes us or breaks us? It comes back to the way we see the trial that we're going through. Do we see it as something just to push through? Or do we see it as an opportunity to learn something? And listen, I don't want to minimize, and I don't think James is minimizing the struggle that you're going through. There's real pain. There's real heartbreak. There's real loss. And that's not something that God doesn't care about. It's not something we should just like make a small and be like, no, just consider it all joy. No. The idea is we as we're going through this, if we have the strength to just stop and say, yes, this is painful, but what is there something I can pull from this? I think you'll be amazed to see how we can grow through all of this. But it starts with the way that we see it. For me, the big thing that stops me from getting the most out of my struggles, honestly, is shame. If I'm going through something difficult, often I'll blame myself for the reason that I'm there. I'll be like, well, you know what? I wouldn't have this struggle if I didn't think this way. Or if I hadn't done this or said that, I wouldn't be here. And so I brought this on myself and just kind of wait for it to pass. But this cool thing when James says struggles, trials of many kinds, all kinds of struggle, trials. Like whether you brought this on yourself or not, there's so much to be gained from it. In fact, I would argue that there's more to be gained by failing and learning than succeeding in the first place. And so maybe you dug this hole. Maybe you started this fight. Maybe you broke the trust. And maybe it's put you in a place that frankly, like you put yourself. That doesn't mean that that you can't get something from this. It all comes back to the way that we see our circumstances. The way that we see God. The way that we see God will change the way that we see our circumstances. As we wrap up this series, we've been talking a lot about faith, a lot about confidence. And I think it's really, really important to point out that we're not talking about faith or confidence or trust in an outcome. We're talking about faith, trust, confidence in a person, in a being, like in God. In other words, you might have heard, maybe it was some teacher, maybe it was on TV, maybe it was in a book, maybe you were told, you want something, you just throw it up there, ask God for it, and then just believe. Just get all your belief muscles and believe it, and if you believe it hard enough, well, boom. Like God is some cosmic vending machine, and as long as you got enough faith, you could just E3, and boom, there comes the thing that you want. That kind of faith will fail. That paper towel plop, it will fall right through, and it will leave you disappointed. Because we're not promised that we'll get everything we want. But what we are promised is that there is someone for us. The people that James was someone who is for us. The people James was writing to, they knew that Jesus dying on the cross was his way of showing us that he was in our corner. That he would give everything for us. They knew that, Paul writes in his letter to the church in Rome, that all things could work together. Not that all things are good, but that all things could work together for good. They knew that, and they held onto it. And so they trusted. What James is talking about, what's tested is your trust, your confidence in God, not in what you think God might do for you or what you think God can do. Let me put it this way. I want my kids to trust me. I'm working to get them to trust me. It's not easy. They're a little crazy. But I'm trying, and so am I. And I'm trying to get them to trust me, right? Now, what a lot of us have been taught, if we're going to cross the metaphor over to real life, is what they should do if their relationship is with God. They should be okay, we want Lucky Charms for dinner, and we're just going to believe and trust, Lucky Charms for dinner. And on a bad night, they're getting Lucky Charms for dinner. But most of the time, no, they're not. And that doesn't mean that, that is trust in an outcome, not trust in a person. And maybe in the moment when they don't get Lucky Charms, they might be what are you doing? We thought we could trust you. We thought you had it. But I know where Lucky Charms for dinner leads every night. And maybe one day they'll look back and be yeah, you know what? I'm sure am glad that we didn't eat Lucky Charms for dinner. I'm glad he made me eat my vegetables. That's trust in and maybe right now, that's your story. Maybe you're praying so hard, maybe it's a job thing, maybe it's a sickness thing, maybe it's something that you can't wrap your mind and you want it so bad and you're I'm praying, and I'm trusting, and maybe you'll get that, but maybe you won't. But that doesn't mean God doesn't have your best in mind. It doesn't mean he can't be trusted. And there may be a day where you look back and go, man, if I would have gotten what I wanted, holy cow, my life would look radically different. It would have been horrible. It's trust in a person. And the way we see that person will affect the way we see our circumstances. I'm going to call the band back up. But I want to leave you with this story. So at the last church that I worked at, I met this couple, great couple. They had a child, and this was their only child, and she was born with a really serious condition. It affected her physically. It affected her mentally. She couldn't walk. She couldn't communicate verbally. And so taking care of this child was an enormous task. Every day was extremely difficult. And eventually, after 11 years, their daughter passed away at age 11. It's not something that they, I'm sure, would wish on anybody. But throughout all of it, like, their faith in God grew. They trusted him. They learned to trust. They had no other option but to trust in him on a regular basis every single day for the strength they needed to get through. And to get through the pain, the grief, the loss, even after that. Horrible. Horrible. But the two of them are some of the most faithful people that I know. In fact, even today, like every once in a while, I'll get an email from the mother just encouraging me, like reminding me that I've got to trust God. And she'll say, I'm praying for that new church in Babylon. Amazing. But the most meaningful, profound email I ever got from her was a couple years ago. Where out of the blue, she emailed me and she said, I praise God for whatever difficulty you're facing right now. And then she went on to say, because I know that he'll use it for your good and to show you how good he is, even though you may not understand it. And you can understand like how much more that meant coming from somebody like that. So my question for you, as we wrap up this series, what is your trial? What is your difficulty? What's the thing in front of you that you don't understand? Rather than asking like, how can I get out of it? What if we change the way that we saw it? Knowing that there's a God who's for us, started asking like, what do I need to get out of this? Maybe we'll see that God can be trusted. Let's pray. God, you are good and you care, you love us, and we're grateful for that. Would you make us people of faith, or of a little more faith than we have right now? Would you help us to hold on to your goodness, to hold on to the promises that you've made us, to work all things together for good? The promise that you are for us. Help us to rest in that, to live our lives and see everything through those lenses. In Jesus' name we pray.